All right, how's it going out there, folks? Welcome back here to a Monday morning. Start of the work week here is upon us. 9:57 a.m. That's California time here. September 15th, 2025 is the date. Latest activity shows a 6.0 earthquake coming into the Kuril Kamchatka Trench. That earthquake did show up quite nicely there on the Japan station. Also, of course, the closest station there, Russia station, around the Kamchatka area. A pretty decent sized earthquake or aftershock, whichever you choose. Of course, this area has had a lot of earthquake activity here recently, including the more recent 7.4, which is the largest aftershock from the 8.8 that struck back here in July. There's been a bunch of earthquake activity out here, and more so than I would say normal in terms of the aftershock sequence. There's obviously a little bit of concern here that we're not quite done with the larger adjustment there along the Kuril Kamchatka. That's why I said to watch these magnitudes here. If they continue to increase and get larger, well, that could be a sign here that that we still may see some larger earthquake activity. In fact, larger than the 7.4 that struck here just a couple days ago. Now, remember the 8.8, that was the big one so far. But let's go back here to the July 8 time period, and I'll show you guys the amount of earthquake activity that struck up here along the Kuril Kamchatka. It's been an incredible amount of earthquake activity across this zone. This is going to be 4.5 and above for this area. Since the USGS does not cover the smaller magnitudes, but take a look at that. 2,500, over 2,500 earthquakes there since July 8th. A lot of these were all foreshocks. There's the largest earthquake so far in this sequence of events. You can call that the main quake, as of right now. Back in about a week prior to that 8.8, we had a 7.4, and a lot of folks thought that was the main quake until the other larger main quake, right? So there's always a concern here that we may see something larger in this mix. This area can see up to a 9.0. In fact, the USGS here, when they put out their little informational statement on that 8.8, they stated, I don't know if it's mentioned in here, but I believe it was on one of their social media posts here, that this earthquake now has relieved partial stress in the area. Which, obviously means that we could still see some larger movement out there. But that's just a lot of earthquake activity. A lot of this was foreshock, a lot of it aftershock from the 8.8. A bunch of sixes in there. Probably, like I say, a little bit more so than normal in terms of that count. And there's so many fives in there. Continue to watch this. Like I said, if we start seeing multiple upper fives and even some more sixes throughout the day today, then I think it's possible we could see something larger than the 7.4 that struck here just a couple days ago. So watch that closely. Definitely an interesting sequence of events here, striking out there across the that subduction zone. It's a major subduction zone here. You got the Japan Trench. It's easier to see it on this model. Right here is the Japan Trench where the 9.1 struck in 2011. The Kuril Kamchatka begins right here. About a 500 kilometer long section here is what ruptured during the 8.8 in July. But it's, like I say, there's still certain areas out here that are fairly well primed for some large movement. So watch that closely. I don't think it's going to get... I believe this has been reviewed. Let me double check here to see. It has been reviewed by seismologists, so it should hold at that 6.0 level. Also a couple earthquakes down here across the Japan Trench. That's from last night. That one there's from yesterday. This morning here, a 4.4 into the Mariana Trench here. A couple other earthquakes there in the Philippines from yesterday. I'm watching this area around the Nankai Trough. I keep mentioning it here because it is, I think it's got potential for some megaquake activity. With all the movement happening around it, it's an area to watch closely. Way up north here of Greenland, Got some earthquake activity stirring up, a couple fours up there. Let's go ahead and check out the 4.4 just came in right now to the South Africa area. They're in the green flag. A lot of movement happening out here right now. Nothing showing up across the Pacific Northwest, and that's because they haven't added. Let's see if they added anything over the weekend here. There's a couple from yesterday, a couple from Saturday in there as well. Mainly some smaller quakes there across Mount St. Helens, up around Mount Rainier as well. Speaking of Mount Rainier, I was just looking at this seismograph station this morning here, and it looks starting to look active again. Notice the frequency of the events out here. They're starting to look more numerous in comparison to when the swarm happened back there in July. About July 9th or so is when it peaked. Obviously, maybe not as intense, but it's starting to fill in here. This is back in July 9th when the height of the earthquake swarm there across Mount Rainier was ongoing. It's just hundreds of earthquakes there a day. That's what it looked like. As of right now, it's starting to fill in. Not quite as intense, but we are still seeing earthquake activity out there across Mount Rainier. And the odd thing is that nothing at all is being reported out there. I know in one of their latest seismic blogs here, they mentioned that a lot of this is just ice quakes or wind. If this is ice quakes and wind, how come back in July, when this was ongoing here, how come they didn't call all this ice quakes and wind? Obviously these are going to be some bigger readings in terms of earthquake activity, but it is starting to show up a little bit more, I think, here in the last 12 hours or so. So we'll continue to watch that. That's across Mount Rainier. Up at or down here across Mount St. Helens, there's been a number of earthquakes as well. I'll show you guys here real quick on the graph. Nothing being reported here in the last day or so, but there has been some smaller quakes in the background. A couple of these little smaller spikes right here. Those are earthquakes. They're not rock falls. Rock falls may look something like this, a more drawn-out feature. But there's definitely a legit earthquake there from yesterday afternoon, localized there as well. And as you could see, nothing showing up here on the map. Nothing across the Pacific Northwest. So I don't think they've got to add in the majority of these on yet. They may have added a few. All right, let's see. Cascadia subduction zone quiet for now, but tremor counts have been quite elevated out there. With the tremor counts, 171. That's not volcanic tremor, but slow slip events down there across the subduction zone. The last week of activity shows us the majority of it has been confined here across the southern end of the Cascadia subduction zone, where there's been actually quite a bit of earthquake activity here in the last week. Had a lot of clustering going on here across the Gorda Ridges. That's a spreading seafloor center out there. You got to see it on the oceanic crust map. These are ridges, new oceanic crust. As the magma comes up here a little bit, right? Slowly, not quickly, but slowly over time, it creates these ridges out here, a new oceanic crust. Normally what takes place here is further strain down in this location here when we get some earthquake activity. It makes sense. That's why we've been seeing elevated tremor activity. The resulting tremor activity downstream into the deeper area of the Cascadia is resulting in further earthquake activity across the Cascadia fold and thrust belt up here, and a lot happening underneath Northern California here. This is a pretty good cluster of deep earthquake activity associated with the Cascadia subduction zone here in the last week. Underneath Northern California, a portion of the southern end of the Cascadia. 17 miles deep, 18 miles deep. That's down below the locked area, but up from the tremor slow slip event area, adding further strain out there across the locked area of the Cascadia subduction zone. That's definitely building up quite a bit of steam here. The Bay Area, pretty quiet. A handful of earthquakes there along the San Andreas Fault. Most of those, well, got a number of them, it looks like, here after midnight. bouncing back and forth here all over the place. Nothing big. Some smaller quakes out there, but the Parkfield section quiet down here. Southern California, let's see if we got anything above 2.5 here. Actually two of them after midnight here, 2.8 and a 2.6 north of Ridgecrest. Number of smaller quakes out there, microquake activity. Nothing big going on there across Southern California for now, folks, but it's, there's so much possibility out here. A lot of time has passed for large earthquake activity, and we could see that happen at any point in time here, whether it's the Cascadia or the San Andreas Fault or any number of other areas out here that have had historical large earthquake activity with a sufficient amount of time to build up enough strain for a big earthquake. 2.2 out in Nevada. Yellowstone National Park up here, looks like they did add a couple of the earthquakes there from yesterday and some from this morning. I'm glad they went back and did that. Let me show you guys the graph here real quick. Let's see if we can get this to pull up. Hello, there we go. Seismograph station here. There's some of the smaller ones from yesterday. Ones from today. Looks like right there. Maybe a couple over here. But they are including the ones there from last night. So that's good to see. They have added those on. Nothing big going on. There's no huge swarm across Yellowstone. Just a little bit of earthquake activity out there in the small microquake range. The oil field's still rocking and rolling. That's nothing new out there outside of Midland. In fact, a pretty decent cluster out here across this oil field. And that blue, beautiful water you see out there is not a swimming pool for the hardworking oil folks there in the summertime. You do not want to go swimming in that. That's wastewater. There's a whole process involved here where they inject it back into the area below. And there's a lot going on here when it comes to the operations and earthquake activity. Ever since the oil boom, earthquake activity has been ramped up out here across any areas, even up into the Alberta, Canada area where they have their own similar oil fields. Earthquake activity has been crazy up there. Over the last 30 days, got 1,027 earthquakes in this area of the oil fields, and that will continue. Sometimes they can get pretty big as well, up in the upper 5 range. So right now, just some 2s and 3s out there and some smaller quakes. Around the Oklahoma City area as well, there's a number of oil fields outside the region. Eastern portion of the country, pretty quiet. We are getting some further movement down here across the eastern edge here of the Caribbean plate into that subduction zone region here. 5.0 showing up in this area. That's the second earthquake in this region, I believe. Let's see. I know they had another one back there. Maybe it was smaller than the 4.0 threshold. Maybe it's been over 30 days, has it? No. I thought there was another one up here. Looks like maybe it disappeared. Either way, a 5-pointer, 37 miles deep here. This area can get some big earthquakes as well. I'm kind of curious to see when our last big event was out there. Let's go 6.0 and above. I'm going to go back here in time to the year 1000, even though I guarantee you not all the earthquakes are going to be in there. It's just what the USGS can document there. I want to check specifically this area, which I know can get some big earthquakes. The last one looks to be a 6.1 in this area back in 2023. There was 3 6-pointers out there in 2014, 15, and 16. 7.4 back in 2007 in this area. There's 7.5, 1974. See lots of 7s out there. Look at that big one. 8.5. So yeah, obviously this area can get some big mega quake activity. Now whether it's coming up due or not, just have to watch this and see what happens with the earthquake activity out there. If that increases, then I would say yes, that's might be something we need to watch. I'm just going to screen capture that. All right, what else we got here? South America region, a handful of earthquakes there. Some from yesterday, some from today. Look at the earthquake 3D globe for that area. Yeah, it's kind of backing off a little bit today. There's some small quake activity in the region of the Kuril Trench. The Middle America Trench has been quite active up here recently. Pretty good clustering going on there across that subduction zone. And that area, you can see it more on the oceanic crust map, extends here from about Mexico all the way down south here. When we get activity in this zone, it normally puts a squeeze out there on the Caribbean plate, and that's where that 5-pointer struck this morning. The general plate stress movement does put it over there to the east. If you look here on my map, this area right here, here's the Caribbean plate. Notice the two arrows there point together. That's a subduction zone. But the general strain here gets put right on that Caribbean plate there. It's getting squeezed from the area from the south, which is the South America plate. And just a whole lot of dynamic pressure there in that area. Of course, back over here, earlier this year, we had that 7.5, I believe it was, across that fracture zone. So this area is definitely strained. We'll watch for some larger movement in that area. Atlantic Ocean, pretty quiet. Like I say, a couple earthquakes way up north there, fairly new. 5.1 out there in the Mediterranean. Been a trail of activity out here yesterday and today. The USGS showing some of that activity as well. Looks like in the region of the Malta area, off the coast here of Libya, off of the plate boundary as well. But I do think something's brewing out here with all the movement. It's been stretching all the way roughly from the swarm there in India all the way across this plate boundary. Although it's kind of skipping the Nepal area around the Himalayas. That may be a spot here that may fill in because there is some newer activity here just on the plate boundary west of Nepal. But pretty active. Is that 4.4 South Africa? See New Zealand down here, a couple 3 stirring up today. Also some inland activity, intraplate boundary showing some strain with the 3.8 and 3.7. Watch New Zealand here. It's fairly well primed. We could sit here all day and talk about areas that are well primed and stress. The thing is, we got to watch, for these little telltale signs where things may be building. A lot of times we'll see swarms, similar to what we had back in July there. That whole sequence of events. I knew there was something off. I knew that 7.4 was not the main quake. I talked about it a lot in my videos, talking about how we could see a larger mega quake in the area just because of all the elevated supposed aftershock activity from the 7.4. But sure enough, 10 days later, we had that 8.8. So these big quakes sometimes gives us little hints. This was pretty much identical to what happened in 2011 there when they had a similar event. Of course, the big one was a 9.1, but 3 days prior to that 9.1, they had a 7.4, I believe, and a bunch of other 6s. So when things continue to increase here after somewhat of a large quake, then that could be a bad sign. When you start seeing multiple larger events there on an increasing note. Similar to what we're seeing, today, it's still not out of the question here that we could see some larger movement along the Kuril Kamchatka Trench. Hawaii, nothing showing up there. Middle America Trench, another 3.4 right now, just here in the last few minutes. So we're getting a lot of activity bouncing back and forth all over the planet. There is a couple smaller quakes here up around the Kilauea volcano. Pretty shallow earthquakes. I do want to take a peek there and see what we got across the Kilauea volcano. And by the way, real quick, folks, while we're waiting on this, member drawing is going to be held in 5 days on the 20th. It's something we do every single month where we give away cash prizes. Or if you want some geology kits or merchandise, Earthmaster merchandise, you're welcome to that as well. We're picking out 2 winners this month, so jump on board and become a member today, 5 days from now. Leveling out slightly, although we're getting close, I think, to an eruption. It does kind of have a little downward trend over the last few eruptions here, but Could be getting close. Let's see what it looks like up at the summit area of Kilauea Volcano. It's pretty slow for some reason. It's not on my end. Still got volcanic gases out there. That's normal. Yeah, I don't see any signs of any eruption activity for sure, but we could see it, excuse me, at any given time here, next couple days or so. All right, space weather activity real quick. Seen some decent aurora pictures out there from a few friends there on social media network. That reached up to a G3 class storm. That was associated with that coronal hole that was facing us here. Remember that? Number 78? Back when it was facing us. It takes about 72 hours or so for the arrival of the high-speed solar wind stream to reach the planet. And sure enough, it did last night. Still a little bit of unsettled conditions out there, although it does look like we have a northward tilt pointing interplanetary magnetic field here. The BT-BZ component has closed in. Last night when it was storming, G3 class storm, solar storm, that was wide open. So since then we've closed up, even though the speed is still somewhat elevated there. It looks like it's still above 600 km. No major solar flares happening. Flare threat sitting at 30% chance there for M flare, X flare around 5%. There is a couple different sunspots out here. 4217 is a newer number. It does look like a lot of this stuff is offline here, or unless Kevin's having some issues with his site. And this is a day and a half old. I don't know what's going on with this site here, but everything looks like it's offline. Looks like the NASA site's been having some issues there, nasa.gov, and the SDO imagery, because that's not working. All right. Well, we'll move on here. I mean, there's really not a whole lot of active sunspot areas, but we'll check those a little bit later on this evening. Real quick on the Storm Prediction Center for severe weather, as you can see, not a whole lot. Definitely not a whole lot out there. We do have some moisture here from this hurricane. I think it's, I can't remember the name here, but it is going to weaken and head towards Southern California, bringing with it some moisture benefits. Look at that. Going to get quite a bit of rainfall. In fact, it looks like maybe up around my neck of the woods a decent amount of rainfall. I live just outside of Chico here, so that would be nice to get some rainfall, even some thunderstorms. Pending there's rainfall with them, you know. The lightning strikes, obviously some danger for fire concern, but when you have a lot of sufficient moisture in the air from that tropical system, that could be good. So it looks, the patterns are getting interesting out here. They're starting to mix up. You know, we're heading into fall. We're going to see the jet stream drop down more. Things are going to get crazy for severe weather possible up here across southern plains and areas down south. So we'll have to watch that. As far as any hurricane activity goes for the Atlantic, I just find it extremely odd here. We haven't had any of them. I mean, we've had some out in the Atlantic, but nothing get close here to the states. Let's see what we got. What is going on here? Yeah, I don't see anything entering into the Gulf. Maybe way down in October, but I don't know. It's still a ways out there. Just definitely an interesting pattern. I mean, you know, I don't think the folks that live out there are complaining. That's for sure. No hurricane activity this year, at least hitting the land. That's good. All right, so for now, again, 6.0, Kuril Kamchatka Trench. We'll watch things out here today. That's definitely the largest earthquake here in the last 24 hours. Seismograph stations out there. A couple more earthquakes there on the Russia station, but those are generally small ones that the USGS will not pick up on. Looks like there's a 4.4. Well, that's from 9:06 in the morning. Not for sure why that's showing up. All right, folks, have a good Monday. We will see you guys out here for the Monday update unless something major happens between now and then. Take care, stay safe, and just be on guard out here. A whole lot of possibilities. Have a good one.